The fate of the human race hung in the balance as alien warlords amassed an armada at the edge of the solar system. Christian Mason, Earth's top astrophysicist, raced towards the UN Emergency Summit, his mind reeling with the staggering implications of the NASA invasion fleet. As he burst into the conference room, the world's leaders turned to him, desperation etched on their faces. They all knew the grim truth. Earth's defenses were hopelessly outmatched against the aliens' advanced technology. Christian took a deep breath and revealed humanity's last hope, the experimental Dyson Swarm project, designed to harness the sun's immense power. Untested and risky, the megastructure could destabilize the sun itself if something went wrong. But with time running out, the leaders had no choice but to gamble everything on Christian's audacious plan. Aboard the NASA flagship, Gruss, the ruthless warlord, overruled his advisors' calls for caution. Driven by an unwavering belief in NASA supremacy, he ordered the armada to advance on Earth, determined to crush humanity before they could pose a real threat. As the alien fleet closed in, Christian and his team raced against the clock to deploy the Dyson Swarm. The swarm of solar collectors enveloped the sun, but the immense forces pushed the hastily constructed megastructure to its limits. With the world watching in terror, Christian faced a harrowing realization. In his desperate attempt to save humanity, he might have just doomed them all. As the Dyson Swarm strained against the immense forces of the sun, Christian gripped the control console, his fist clenched. He knew this was their one chance to turn the tide against the NASA invaders. With a deep breath, he aligned the solar collectors and focused the sun's raw power into a coherent beam of plasma. Light years away, the beam lanced across the void of space and speared the NASA flagship. In an instant, the massive vessel vanished in a blinding flash, reduced to a cloud of ionized gas. On the bridge, Gruss had only a moment to register the searing light before he and his ship ceased to exist. The rest of the NASA fleet reeled in shock as their leader's ship disintegrated before their eyes. The warlords, once confident in their supremacy, now scrambled to make sense of this stunning turn of events. Zarn, his face grim, barked orders to the fleet, trying to rally them for a counterattack. But it was too late. One by one, the NASA ships signaled their surrender, unwilling to face the same fate as their flagship. On Earth, jubilant crowds filled the streets, celebrating the impossible victory. In the UN conference room, the world's leaders embraced, tears of relief streaming down their faces. Christian, however, had no time for celebration. Alarms blared throughout the control center as the Dyson Swarm began to unravel. The delicate megastructure pushed beyond its limits. He and his team worked frantically to stabilize the swarm, knowing that if it collapsed, it could trigger a catastrophic solar event. As the world rejoiced, a sleek, unmarked spacecraft slipped through Earth's defenses, unnoticed in the chaos. Aboard, Lyra, a brilliant NASA scientist and covert operative, reviewed her mission briefing. Her task was clear: infiltrate the human research facility and uncover the secrets of the Dyson Swarm. Lyra, disguised as a low-level technician, made her way into Christian's lab, her keen eyes taking in every detail. She watched as the human scientists struggled to maintain control of the swarm, their desperation evident. Slowly, methodically, she began to piece together the truth behind Earth's sudden victory. As the Dyson Swarm stabilized and Earth's leaders basked in their triumph, Lyra realized that the balance of power was more precarious than either side realized. The solar beam, for all its devastating power, was a one-time gambit, and the humans were now scrambling to maintain the illusion of control. With this knowledge, Lyra set to work, carefully planting the seeds of doubt and discord among the human leadership. She knew that the real battle for the future of both their species would be fought not with weapons, but with information and influence. As Christian and his team worked tirelessly to solidify Earth's position, unaware of the new threat in their midst, the stage was set for a shadowy conflict that would determine the fate of two civilizations. The NASA Armada may have been defeated, but the true struggle for power was just beginning. In the days following the NASA surrender, an uneasy calm settled over Earth. The streets, once filled with jubilant celebrations, now buzzed with a mix of relief and uncertainty. In the halls of power, world leaders grappled with the implications of their newfound position on the galactic stage. Christian Mason, the architect of humanity's stunning victory, found himself at the center of a media maelstrom. His face graced the covers of magazines, and his name dominated the news feeds, hailed as the savior of the human race. But behind the confident facade, Christian wrestled with a grim reality. Earth's dominance was built on a fragile foundation, and the Dyson swarm, for all its incredible power, was little more than a risky move. In a dimly lit conference room, Christian faced a room full of anxious world leaders. "We bought ourselves a reprieve," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "But make no mistake, the Nasat will not simply fade into the shadows. We must act now to solidify our position, to transform the Dyson swarm from a one-time trick into a true weapon." The leaders exchanged nervous glances, the gravity of the situation sinking in. With a nod of agreement, they authorized Christian to begin a crash program, pouring resources into the development of the swarm. As Christian assembled his team, he made a surprising choice. Lyra, the mysterious Nasat scientist who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere in the chaos following the invasion. Her brilliant mind and unique perspective on Nasat technology made her an invaluable asset, and Christian wasted no time in recruiting her to his cause. Lyra, for her part, accepted the position with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She knew that working alongside Christian would provide her with unparalleled access to Earth's most closely guarded secrets, a treasure trove of intelligence that could shape the future of her people. But as she spent long hours in the lab with the charismatic human scientist, she found herself drawn to his passion and vision in ways she had not anticipated. As Christian and Lyra worked to unlock the full potential of the Dyson swarm, they found themselves pushing the boundaries of both science and their own complicated emotions. Late nights spent poring over schematics and equations led to stolen glances and accidental touches, the seeds of a forbidden attraction taking root amidst the pressures of their monumental task. On the Nasat homeworld, a new power was rising from the ashes of the defeated warlords. Zarn, a once trusted advisor, now seized the reins of leadership, his eyes fixed on the distant prize of Earth. In shadowy meetings and encrypted communications, he laid the groundwork for a new kind of war, one fought not with ships and weapons, but with information and influence. Zarn's agents, handpicked for their cunning and adaptability, began to filter into human society, exploiting the cracks that had formed in the wake of the invasion. They whispered in the ears of politicians and generals, stoking the fires of ambition and fear, sowing the seeds of discord that would one day blossom into the downfall of humanity. On Earth, the debate over the future of the human-Nasat relationship grew increasingly heated. In the halls of the UN and the corridors of power around the world, factions emerged, each with their own vision for the path ahead. Some clamored for aggression, insisting that the Dyson swarm be used to bludgeon the Nasat and any other potential threats into submission. Others, wary of the moral implications of such power, argued for a more nuanced approach, one built on diplomacy and mutual understanding. As the political landscape shifted and alliances formed and fractured, Christian and Lyra found themselves at the center of a maelstrom, their work on the Dyson swarm taking on new urgency with each passing day. They pushed themselves to the brink of exhaustion, driven by the knowledge that the fate of two civilizations rested on their shoulders. But even as they made breathtaking strides in their work, they could not escape the growing tension between them, the unspoken attraction that simmered beneath the surface of their professional relationship. In stolen moments, they found themselves drawn to each other, their hands brushing as they reached for the same tool, their eyes locking across a crowded lab. It was a dangerous game they played, one with no clear end in sight. As the Dyson swarm grew in power and the political machinations on Earth and beyond reached a fever pitch, Christian and Lyra found themselves navigating a labyrinth of secrets and lies, never quite certain where the next twist in the path would lead. The future of humanity and the delicate balance of power in the galaxy hung in the balance, and only time would tell if Christian and Lyra's work would be enough to tip the scales in Earth's favor. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher, and the line between ally and enemy blurred a little more, until neither of them was quite sure where their true loyalties lay. The lab hummed with activity as Christian and Lyra pored over schematics of the Dyson swarm's control systems, their heads bent close together, fingers occasionally brushing as they traced complex energy pathways across the holographic display. Rafe Simmons watched from across the room, his brow furrowed. He'd known Christian for years, could read his body language like an open book. The way Christian leaned in, the softness in his eyes when he looked at Lyra, it was more than professional admiration. "Chris, got a minute?" Rafe called out, gesturing towards the corridor. Christian nodded, excusing himself. As the door hissed shut behind them, Rafe's face grew serious. "We need to talk about Lyra." "What about her?" Christian asked, his tone wary. Rafe lowered his voice. "I've noticed you two getting close. Look, I get it. She's brilliant, beautiful, but we know next to nothing about her background. With everything that's at stake—" "Stop right there," Christian cut him off, eyes flashing. "Lyra's made invaluable contributions to this project. I trust her completely." "You're letting your feelings cloud your judgment," Rafe pressed. "We can't afford to take risks, not with—" "That's enough," Christian snapped. "I don't want to hear another word about this. Lyra stays. End of discussion." As Christian stalked back into the lab, Lyra glanced up, concern etched on her face. She'd seen the heated exchange through the glass walls. Guilt gnawed at her insides as she thought of the encrypted data chip hidden in her quarters, loaded with classified information on the Dyson Swarm's capabilities. That night, after the rest of the team had left, Lyra initiated a secure transmission to a nondescript relay station orbiting Jupiter. Zarn's face materialized on her screen, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Report," he commanded. Lyra's voice was steady as she outlined the latest breakthroughs in weapons integration for the Dyson Swarm. She tried to ignore the twisting in her gut, the image of Christian's trusting smile that flashed unbidden through her mind. On the Nasat homeworld, Zarn absorbed the information with predatory satisfaction. He turned to his assembled lieutenants, mandibles clicking in excitement. "Prepare our operatives. It's time to strike." Across the solar system, carefully planted, Nasat agents sprang into action. A sabotaged fusion reactor on Mars exploded, crippling a vital supply line. An asteroid mining operation went dark, its crew found drifting in space. Each incident eroded humanity's tenuous grip on its newfound power. Back on Earth, Thomas Nguyen's fingers flew across his keyboard, heart pounding. The young programmer had stumbled across an anomaly in the lab's data transfer logs. Periodic bursts of encrypted information, origin unknown. As he dug deeper, a sickening realization dawned. The transmissions coincided perfectly with Lyra's late-night work sessions. Thomas slumped back in his chair, palms sweating. If his suspicions were correct, the implications were staggering. But accusing Lyra meant potentially destroying Christian's career as well. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. In Washington, D.C., the atmosphere crackled with tension as President Emily Hawthorne faced down General Harlan Ross across the Situation Room table. "Madam President, these attacks are just the beginning," Ross insisted, his fist tight. "We need to use the Dyson Swarm now, before the Nasat can mount a full-scale offensive." "And risk plunging us into an interstellar war?" countered Samantha Lee, the president's chief diplomat. "We don't even know if these incidents are connected to the Nasat. We need more information before—" A junior aide burst into the room, face pale. "Madam President, there's been another attack. New Houston colony. It's gone. Completely destroyed." The room erupted into chaos. As voices shouted over each other, a data file appeared on the main screen, security footage from New Houston's last moments. And there, unmistakable amidst the destruction, was the telltale energy signature of a Dyson Swarm weapon. President Hawthorne's voice cut through the din. "Get me Christian Mason, now!" In the lab, alarms blared as armed security personnel swarmed in. Christian looked up in shock as rifles trained on him and his team. Lyra's eyes met his, a maelstrom of emotions swirling in their depths. As they were led away in restraints, the future of two civilizations hung in the balance, with the truth buried somewhere in the tangled web of loyalty, love, and betrayal. Thomas Nguyen's fingers trembled as he stared at the damning evidence on his screen. The encrypted transmissions, the timing of Lyra's late-night sessions, it all pointed to an inescapable conclusion. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. The lab hummed with its usual activity, scientists and engineers bustling about their work. Lyra stood at her station, her graceful form bent over a holographic display. Thomas watched her, his heart heavy with the weight of his discovery. "Lyra," he called out, his voice barely steady, "can I see you in Lab C for a moment? There's something I need your input on." She looked up, surprise flickering across her features, before she nodded. "Of course, Thomas." As they entered the smaller, more secluded lab, Thomas sealed the door behind them. Lyra turned to face him, her eyebrows raised in question. "What's this about?" she asked. Thomas took a deep breath. "I know, Lyra, about the transmissions." Her face remained impassive, but he noticed the slight tensing of her shoulders. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully. "Don't," Thomas cut her off, his voice tight. "I've seen the data logs. The encrypted bursts coincide perfectly with your work sessions. You've been communicating with the NASAT." Lyra's composure cracked, her eyes widening in alarm. For a moment, she seemed about to deny it again, but then her shoulders slumped. "How did you find out?" "I'm good at what I do," Thomas replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "Why, Lyra? We trusted you. Christian trusted you." At the mention of Christian's name, pain flashed across Lyra's face. "It's not that simple, Thomas. My people—" She lunged forward suddenly, her hand darting for a nearby tool. Thomas reacted on instinct, grappling with her. They crashed into a workbench, sending equipment clattering to the floor. Lyra was strong, her alien physiology giving her an edge, but Thomas's desperation lent him strength. After a furious struggle, he managed to pin her arms behind her back. Both of them were breathing heavily, the lab in disarray around them. "I'm sorry," Lyra whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for it to go this far." Thomas's mind raced. He should call security, alert Christian immediately. But the memory of Christian's face when he looked at Lyra, the obvious affection between them, made him hesitate. "Stay here," he ordered, securing Lyra to a sturdy lab table with reinforced cable ties. "Don't try anything. I need to think." Heart pounding, Thomas sprinted through the facility, searching for Christian. He found him in the main control room, deep in conversation with Rafe Simmons. "Chris," Thomas gasped out of breath, "we need to talk, now." Christian's brow furrowed at Thomas's urgent tone. "What's wrong?" Thomas glanced at Rafe, then back to Christian. "It's about Lyra. She's been communicating with the NASAT. She's a spy." The color drained from Christian's face. "That's impossible. You must be mistaken." "I wish I was," Thomas said quietly. "But I have proof," and she admitted it. Christian staggered back as if physically struck. Rafe's expression hardened, his earlier suspicions confirmed. "Where is she now?" Rafe demanded. "Secured in Lab C," Thomas replied. Before they could discuss further, alarms blared throughout the facility. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Security breach! Multiple hostile targets detected!" Christian's shocked expression gave way to unshakable focus. "Rafe, initiate lockdown protocols. Thomas, with me." As they raced through the corridors, the facility shuddered under the impact of explosions. They reached Lab C to find the door hanging off its hinges, Lyra nowhere in sight. Christian's communicator chirped. President Hawthorne's voice cut through the chaos. "Mason, what the hell is going on? We're getting reports of widespread attacks. New Houston is gone, and the energy signature matches the Dyson swarm." As Christian struggled to formulate a response, the implications of Lyra's betrayal and the unfolding crisis threatened to overwhelm him. The future of two civilizations now balanced on a knife's edge, with the truth buried somewhere in the tangled web of loyalty, love, and bitter choices that lay ahead. Christian stood motionless, his world crumbling around him as alarms blared and chaos engulfed the facility. The weight of Lyra's betrayal pressed down on him, threatening to suffocate him. But amidst the turmoil, a seed of doubt took root in his mind. "Wait," he said, grabbing Thomas's arm as they prepared to pursue Lyra. "There's more to this. We need to hear her out." Thomas gaped at him. "Chris, she's a spy. "I know," Christian cut him off, his voice firm. "But I also know Lyra. There's a piece we're missing. They found her in the auxiliary control room, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. She whirled to face them, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and willpower. "Christian," she breathed, "I can explain." "Then do it," he said, his voice tight. "Quickly!" Lyra's words tumbled out in a rush, painting a picture of divided loyalties and impossible choices. She spoke of the growing peace movement among her people, of her own doubts about the conflict, and then she dropped the bombshell that shook Christian to his core. "The Dyson swarm," she said, her eyes locked on his. "It's not what everyone thinks it is it?" Christian's breath caught in his throat. How could she know? Lyra continued, her voice urgent. "You have to tell them the truth, Christian. Both sides. It's the only way to end this madness." For a moment, Christian was frozen, torn between duty and the undeniable pull of his heart. Then, with a deep breath, he made his choice. "Get me a secure line to the president," he ordered Thomas. "It's time to end this charade." The next hours passed in a blur of tense conversations and nearly unleashed panic. President Hawthorne's face was ashen as Christian laid out the truth. The Dyson swarm's offensive capabilities were a bluff, a daring plan to secure humanity's position. General Ross exploded in fury. "You've doomed us all," he roared. "This is treason." But Hawthorne, after a long moment of silence, nodded grimly. "No, General. This may be our only chance to avoid mutual destruction." She turned to Christian. "What do you propose?" Christian outlined his plan, heart pounding. A bold diplomatic initiative, leveraging the truth to bring both sides to the table. It was a gamble, but one that offered a glimmer of hope. As the human leadership debated furiously, light years away on the Nasat homeworld, Zarn received the intercepted transmission. His mandibles clicked in triumph as he processed the implications. "Prepare our forces," he ordered his lieutenants. "The humans are vulnerable. We will—" He was cut off by a commotion outside his command center. The sounds of chanting filled the air as throngs of Nasat civilians flooded the streets, their voices raised in calls for peace. Zarn's eyes narrowed as he watched the scene unfold on his view screens. The revelation of human weakness had not sparked the reaction he'd anticipated. Instead, it seemed to have galvanized the growing pro-peace movement among his own people. Back on Earth, Christian found himself thrust into the center of a diplomatic maelstrom. President Hawthorne had taken the extraordinary step of inviting Nasat leadership to neutral ground for talks. And at the heart of it all was the tantalizing offer from the Nasat peace faction, advanced technology that could transform the Dyson swarm from bluff to reality, but only if used for defense. As preparations for the summit began, Christian felt a familiar presence at his side. Lyra stood there, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions. "I never thought we'd get this far," she said softly. Christian met her gaze, his own feelings a turbulent storm. "We're not out of the woods yet," he replied. "There's still so much that could go wrong." Lyra nodded, then hesitantly reached out to touch his arm. "Whatever happens, I want you to know. What we had, what we shared, it was real. At least for me." Christian's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to believe her, desperately, but the scars of betrayal were still raw. "We have work to do," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "The future of both our peoples depends on what happens next." As they turned to face the monumental task ahead, the air crackled with tension and possibility. The path to peace was fraught with danger, but for the first time in years, there was hope. Christian squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, even if it meant working side by side with the woman who had both betrayed and possibly saved him. The negotiations unfolded in a sprawling complex on neutral ground, its sleek architecture a blend of human and Nasat design. Christian paced the length of the control room, his eyes darting between holographic displays, showing the progress of the talks and the integration of Nasat technology into the Dyson swarm. "Status update," he barked, fatigue etching lines around his eyes. Thomas looked up from his station. "Integration at 78%. We're seeing a 300% increase in defensive capabilities." Christian nodded, a flicker of hope kindling in his chest. He caught sight of Lyra across the room, her graceful form bent over a console. Their eyes met briefly, a current of unspoken tension passing between them. A klaxon shattered the tense quiet. Red warning lights bathed the room as alarms blared. "Multiple breaches detected," Tomas shouted. "They've infiltrated the secure zone." Christian's blood ran cold. "On screen now!" The main display flickered to life, showing chaotic scenes from the conference chambers. NASAT insurgents swarmed through the halls, weapons flaring. President Hawthorne and her delegation were cornered, surrounded by hostile forces. "Get me a direct line to General Ross," Christian ordered, his voice tight. Before he could make the call, the screen changed. A familiar NASAT face filled the display, mandibles clicking in triumph. "Greetings, humans," Zarn's voice dripped with contempt. "Your president and her lackeys are now under our control. You have one planetary rotation to surrender Earth to NASAT rule, or they die." The transmission cut off abruptly. Christian's fists clenched at his sides, mind racing through scenarios. "Sir," a junior officer called out, her voice shaking, "we're receiving reports of attacks across multiple sectors. Zarn's forces are pushing hard." Christian closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he opened them, his gaze was steel. "Activate the Dyson Swarm's enhanced defenses. All personnel to battle stations. We're going in." As the facility erupted into frenzied activity, Christian felt a presence at his side. Lyra stood there, her alien features set in dedication. "I can help," she said softly. "I know Zarn's tactics, his weaknesses." Christian studied her face, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, he nodded curtly. "You're with me, then. Let's end this." They moved swiftly through the complex, coordinating the counterattack. Human and pro-peace NASAT forces rallied, pushing back against Zarn's insurgents. Christian led from the front, Lyra at his side, her insights proving invaluable. As they neared the hostage chamber, a familiar figure stumbled into view. Samantha Lee, the president's advisor, clutched a bleeding wound in her side. "Christian," she gasped, collapsing into his arms. "They're in there. Hawthorne." "Get her to medical," Christian ordered a nearby soldier. He turned to Lyra, his expression grim. "This ends now." They burst into the chamber, weapons raised. Zarn stood at the center, surrounded by his forces. President Hawthorne and the other hostages knelt before him, fear and defiance warring on their faces. "Ah, the prodigal daughter returns," Zarn sneered, his eyes locked on Lyra, "and with her pet human no less." Christian tensed, ready to fire, but Lyra's next words froze him in place. "I've done as you asked, Zarn," she said, her voice cold. "I've given you everything you need to crush these vermin." She stepped away from Christian, moving to stand beside Zarn. The NASAT leader's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. "Well done, my love," he purred. "Now, watch as we claim our rightful place as rulers of this sector." Christian's world tilted on its axis. The betrayal cut deeper than he could have imagined. As Zarn's forces moved to restrain him, his communicator crackled to life. "Mason," General Ross's voice rang out, "I'm taking control of the swarm. We'll obliterate these bastards once and for all." Time seemed to slow as Christian processed the rapidly escalating situation. The Dyson swarm, now enhanced with NASAT technology, poised to unleash devastating power. Lyra's apparent betrayal, the lives of Earth's leadership hanging in the balance. In that moment, with the fate of two civilizations resting on his next move, Christian made his choice. Choice. In a fluid motion, Christian twisted away from his captors, his hand flying to his communicator. "Ross, stand down," he barked. "Abort the attack." The general's voice crackled back, thick with rage. "Like hell I will, Mason. We finally have the upper hand." Christian's fingers danced across his wrist device, inputting a series of override codes. The facility shuddered as distant explosions rocked the complex. Alarms blared, signaling the Dyson swarm powering down. Zarn's mandibles clicked in surprise. "What have you done, human?" Before Christian could respond, the chamber doors burst open. Thomas led a team of heavily armed soldiers, their weapons trained on Zarn's forces. "Mr. President," Tomas called out, "we're here to extract you." In the ensuing chaos, Christian locked eyes with Lyra. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of alien features that now seemed more foreign than ever. The room erupted into a firefight. Plasma bolts seared the air, leaving scorch marks on the walls. Christian dove for cover, his mind racing. He had to get to Hawthorne, had to secure her safety. Through the smoke and confusion, he spotted Samantha Lee crumpled on the floor, a dark stain spreading across her side. He crawled towards her, staying low to avoid the crossfire. "Sam!" he shouted over the din. "Hold on!" As he reached her, a shadow loomed over them. Zarn stood there, his alien eyes glittering with malice. In one fluid motion, he hauled Lee to her feet, using her as a shield. "Not another step, Mason," Zarn hissed, "or your friend dies." The firefight sputtered to a halt as both sides realized the precarious situation. Christian rose slowly, his hands raised. "Let her go, Zarn," he said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "This doesn't have to end in more bloodshed." Zarn's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Oh, but it does, human. Your people or mine. Only one species will survive this conflict." Christian's communicator crackled to life once more. Ross's voice filled the chamber, dripping with venom. "Mason, you treasonous bastard! I'm taking control of the swarm, with or without your authorization." The facility rocked with another series of explosions, closer this time. Christian's heart raced as he realized the full scope of the disaster unfolding around him. Zarn began backing towards the exit, dragging the barely conscious Lee with him. "It seems your own people have made my decision for me," he said. "Farewell, Mason. Perhaps we'll meet again, if your world survives." As Zarn disappeared through the doorway, Christian turned to Thomas. "Get the president out of here," he ordered. "I'm going after Lee." Thomas nodded grimly. "What about her?" he asked, gesturing towards Lyra, who stood frozen amidst the chaos. Christian's mind focused. "Take her into custody. We'll deal with her later." As he sprinted after Zarn, Christian's mind whirled with the impossible choices before him. Stop Ross from unleashing interstellar Armageddon. Save Lee from Zarn's clutches. Unravel the web of lies and betrayal that had brought them to this point. And somewhere in the midst of it all, find a way to salvage the peace that now seemed further away than ever. Christian skidded to a halt, his pursuit of Zarn abruptly interrupted by Lyra's urgent voice. "Christian, wait!" she called, her alien features contorted with desperation. "There's something you need to know about Zarn's true intentions." He turned, conflicting emotions warring within him. "Make it quick," he growled, every second feeling like a betrayal to the injured Samantha Lee. Lyra's words tumbled out in a rush. "Zarn plans to reprogram the Dyson swarm into a planet killer. If he succeeds, Earth will be annihilated." Christian's blood ran cold. He activated his comlink. "Thomas, change of plans. Get a team after Lee. I need you on the swarm systems now." As Christian mobilized Earth forces to secure the Dyson swarm, alarms blared throughout the facility. General Ross's voice boomed over the speakers, thick with rage. "All loyal soldiers, this is General Ross. Mason is a traitor to humanity. Take him down by any means necessary." The complex erupted into chaos as Ross's renegade faction clashed with loyalist forces. Plasma bolts seared the air, leaving scorch marks on pristine walls. Christian ducked behind a console, narrowly avoiding a barrage of fire. "Rafe!" Christian shouted into his comm. "Get your strike team to the central control nexus. We can't let Ross or Zarn take control of the swarm." Across the facility, Rafe Simmons nodded grimly to his squad. They moved with practiced precision, cutting through the chaos towards their objective. On the main display, feeds from the Nasat homeworld showed cities in turmoil. Zarn's hardliners battled pro-peace factions in the streets, the conflict Christian had inadvertently sparked now consuming both worlds. A junior officer's voice cut through the din. "Sir, we're detecting multiple breaches in the swarm's outlying nodes. Zarn's operatives are in the system." Christian's fingers flew across his console, initiating emergency lockdown protocols. "Thomas, are you seeing this?" "Affirmative," Tomas's voice crackled back. "They're good, Christian. This is some of the most aggressive code I've ever seen. The main screen fractaled into dozens of windows, each showing a different part of the virtual battle raging within the swarm's systems. Lines of code flashed by at dizzying speeds as human and Nasat cyber warriors clashed in digital space. A familiar face appeared on one of the secondary screens. Thomas Nguyen, his expression grim and determined. "Christian, I've located Lee. Mounting rescue operation now." "Good luck," Christian replied, his attention split between a dozen crises. Hours blurred together in a haze of tactical decisions and furious coding. Christian's eyes burned from staring at screens, his fingers cramped from endless input. Beside him, Lyra worked tirelessly, her alien insights proving invaluable in countering Zarn's strategies. A cheer went up from the human cyber warfare team. "We've pushed them back," a young analyst shouted. "The swarm is ours." Christian allowed himself a moment of relief before Thomas's voice cut through the celebration. "Christian," Thomas gasped, his face pale and drawn on the video feed. "We got Lee, but I've been hit. It's bad." Before Christian could respond, another alert blared. "Sir," a sensor officer called out, "we're detecting a new intrusion in the swarm's core systems. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Christian's eyes widened as he processed the data. "It's Zarn's virus," he breathed. "If it takes hold—" "The swarm becomes a weapon," Lyra finished, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the moment pressed down on Christian. He looked at the screens showing battles raging across two worlds, at Thomas's pained face, at the virus worming its way through their defenses. In that instant, he knew what had to be done. "Lyra," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "The self-destruct protocols, can you access them?" Her alien eyes met his, understanding dawning. "Yes, but Christian, are you sure?" He nodded, already inputting his command codes. "It's the only way to be certain, to save both our worlds." As Christian's fingers hovered over the final command, a harsh voice rang out. "Stand down, Mason!" He turned to see President Hawthorne, flanked by her advisors. Her face was a mask of fury. "You can't make this decision unilaterally. The swarm is our only defense." Christian met her gaze unflinchingly. "Madam President, with all due respect, it's about to become our destruction." He turned back to the console. "Lyra, now!" Their fingers moved in unison, entering the final sequence. A low rumble built throughout the facility as the Dyson swarm began to tear itself apart. A blinding flash filled every screen, momentarily overloading sensors across human and Nasat space. When the light faded, the battlefield had changed irrevocably. Christian sagged against the console, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. Lyra's hand found his, a gesture of support that transcended species. As the dust settled, reports began flooding in. Ross's insurrection routed, Zarn captured by pro-peace Nasat forces, and scattered across the void, the mangled remains of the Dyson swarm, no longer a weapon, but a monument to the cost of conflict. Christian's calm crackled to life, Thomas's voice weak but determined. "Christian, Lee's gone." Her last words, she wanted peace. A heavy silence fell over the command center. Christian straightened, his commitment hardening. The true work was just beginning. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for now, they had averted catastrophe. In the months that followed, an uneasy peace settled over human and Nasat space. President Hawthorne, her face lined with exhaustion, addressed a packed auditorium. "Today we formalize the disarmament accords with our Nasat neighbors," she announced, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "We choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over animosity." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Christian, standing at the back, caught snippets of conversation. "Surrender, more like," a man in a military uniform growled. "Without the swarm, we're defenseless," another voice added. Christian's heart made. He understood their fear, but the alternative had been unthinkable. As he turned to leave, a familiar figure fell into step beside him. "Quite the reception," Lyra said, her multifaceted eyes scanning the crowd. Christian nodded grimly. They'll come around. They have to. Together, they made their way to a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city. Inside, a diverse team of humans and Nasat worked in harmony, poring over cultural artifacts and historical records. "How goes the research?" Christian asked, approaching a young human woman hunched over a holographic display. She looked up, her eyes bright with excitement. "We've made a breakthrough in translating some of the more obscure Nasat dialects. It's fascinating how their language structure reflects their social hierarchies." A sudden commotion at the entrance cut her off. Christian turned to see Thomas burst in, his face pale. "Christian, we have a problem," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Zarn's here." The room fell silent as the disgraced Nasat leader was escorted in, his mandibles clicking nervously. Christian felt Lyra tense beside him. "What is the meaning of this?" Christian demanded. Zarn's alien eyes fixed on Lyra. "I come with a truth that can no longer be hidden," he said, his voice a rasp. "Lyra, you are not who you believe yourself to be." Christian watched as Lyra's expression shifted from confusion to shock as Zarn revealed her true heritage, the lost heir to the Nasat throne, a pawn in a game spanning generations. "I didn't know," Lyra whispered, her voice cracking. "All this time—" Christian reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It doesn't change who you are," he said softly. Before they could process this revelation further, Thomas's communicator buzzed. His face darkened as he listened to the incoming message. "Raid on the Proxima colony," he reported grimly. "Rogue Nasat forces. They're not accepting the peace." Christian's mind raced. The fragile accord they'd fought so hard for was already unraveling. He looked at Lyra, saw the conflict in her eyes. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Christian took a deep breath, feeling the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. "We fight," he said, his voice firm. "Not with weapons, but with truth, with understanding. It's the only way to break this cycle." As they prepared to face this new threat, Christian couldn't shake the feeling that the true test of their drive was only just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.